Welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast, where leaders of all sorts come to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways. I'm your host, Whitney Putnam, and this month on the podcast, we're talking all about teamwork. David actually set us up talking and leading a conversation on teamwork. And then we've heard from the legendary basketball coach, Coach K, and we definitely want you to check those episodes out. And today we have another special treat for you. We actually the GLN hosted an event for pastors where pastors all across the country came together at Willow Creek. And we had a couple of days of inspiration and learning. And during that time, David facilitated a workshop on developing team culture. And we happened to record it. So what you're hearing is the actual recording of that workshop. And we knew it was a no-brainer that we wanted to pull back the curtain for you. And in case you didn't know about David, let me just share a little bit about his life. David has actually had a pretty extraordinary wealth of leadership wisdom and experience. Before David joined the GLN, he led a church in Eastern Pennsylvania called LCBC for over 30 years. And here's the wild part of this story, is he led the church from 150 members to 22,000 people over 19 different sites. All that is to say, in terms of leading teams, he has seen a ton, and he's definitely learned a thing or two. And what's really cool, actually what I love about this community, we really are taking you behind the scenes, a peek behind the curtain, because what David is sharing today in this workshop, in this conversation, is actually what we're doing at the GLN right now in real time. So this is a chance to get a glimpse about how a seasoned leader works to evolve and transition culture in an organization. I know personally I've benefited from David's wisdom and leadership, and our entire organization is as well. So listen, if you're a leader who is curious about how values and behaviors actually factor into the day-to-day life of an organization, or if you just want to get a glimpse of what it looks like to change culture in real time, then this is a great episode for you. Let's jump into the conversation.
When we talk about culture, and I don't think I've got a slide for this, when we talk about culture, it really is what do we celebrate as an organization, and what do we allow or do we not allow? It's what do you celebrate and what do you say no to, if I could just say it in a real simple way. And so the things you say no to, you're setting boundaries, and you go, oh, that's not allowed in this situation. That's not allowed in this organization. The things you celebrate, then it tells everybody, okay, this is what's important to us as a church. And when you begin to define what you don't allow, and you begin to define what you celebrate, that's going to be how you establish culture in a church or in an organizational setting. So I mentioned I grew up in Dallas, and when I went off to college at Texas Tech University, one of the first guys that I met was a guy named Rock Robinson. Rock was a wrestler in high school. He was a state champion wrestler in high school. He was built like a rock. That's his name, Rock Robinson. And Rock and I became very good friends, so much so that when Ruth and I, my wife, were going to be married 4 years later, I asked Rock if he would be the best man in our wedding. But for about 2 years in our relationship between Rock and myself, there was a case of mistaken identity. He was mistaken as to who I was. Somehow, within the first several weeks, months of our relationship, he got the idea that my name was John, not David. My name's David, and he thought I was John. And I didn't realize what was happening until several weeks into the relationship, and he was calling me John. And so, it was one of those awkward deals where you kind of got to the point where I don't know that I can correct him. I mean, it's just going to be awkward to correct him. So I let him keep calling me John. And whenever I would hear Rock or I was with him, and we were literally together every day. We were in a dorm across the hall. We would eat meals together. We were always together. And so whenever I knew Rock was around or if I heard his voice and he said, John, I would just respond. And that went on for 2 years. 2 years without my correcting him. And at some point, we were sitting in a student leadership meeting at Texas Tech, and we were sitting around tables, and there might have been about 10 or 15 people around the tables. And we were working on a project. And as we were working on this project, they were giving assignments, and they were going around the table and saying, okay, you do this, you do that, you do this. And they come to me, and they start saying, okay, David, this is what we need you to do. Rock was in that same meeting. He literally stops the meeting. And he goes, why are you calling him David? His name is John. And so I had to, in front of the other 10 or 15, say, well, Rock, actually, my name is David. You've just been mistaken as to who I am for these last couple of years. And it was awkward, but we were fine, and the relationship went on. But it was a case of mistaken identity. And identity is important. And I would say one of the biggest things that I see in a lot of organizations or a lot of churches is a case of mistaken identity, where we're not actually sure who we are. We're not sure who we are, what we're doing, and we get confused as to what the organization is all about. In a business setting, then we might use the words, what business are we in? Do we even know or understand what business we're in? In our church, when we do baptisms, we put up a pool in the middle of the auditorium, and people come into the water to be baptized. And while they're being in the water, then typically their story is read of life change. And so one particular occasion, one of our auditoriums has about 2,000 people, or it seats 2,000 people, and one of the guys who was being baptized, I thought his name was David, and he was a part of a group we call Pastors Prayer Partners, a group that would come every Sunday morning, and there were 4 or 5 guys that would come, and they would just pray with whoever was preaching that weekend. And so every time this group, they would meet once about a month, and every time this particular group would come to pray with me, then I would say, isn't it amazing? Because I think 4 out of the 5 in that group were all named David. And so every time I would say, isn't it amazing that 4 out of the 5 of us are all named David? And so I would call this guy David. His wife was actually on staff of the church, and several years I called him David. Well, he was going to be baptized on a particular weekend, and so he was coming down into the water, several thousand people there in the room, and we put name tags on the person so that whoever's doing the baptizing knows who that person is. And back then we would actually have a mic in there, and we would talk to the person. And so he comes into the water, and on his name tag it said Mike. And so I say in front of everybody, David, why do they have Mike on your name tag? You're David. And he had to say, well, actually, I'm not. I'm David. I'm Mike. You've been calling me David now for the last several years. And again, a case of mistaken identity. It happens with people, but it happens with organizations too. And if you're going to have a culture that's going to lead towards excellence and a culture that's healthy, one of the first things you've got to figure out is, what in the world are we about? What business are we in?
David is reminding us to ask ourselves a question: what business are we in? So just take a moment to pause. What business are you in? Or are you in a case of mistaken identity? Think it through. Ask your team. Dive in. Are you actually living out the right business? Now let's go hear what David has to say about values.
And if you're going to accomplish your purpose, you've got to know not only what business you're in, but then you also have to figure out, what do you value? And so I want to give you some things that we value at the GLN, and you need to know, okay, these are the things that are important to us as an organization. We have 4 main values around the GLN. You may have several more in your church. I think if you start getting more than 3 or 4 or 5, then it's probably more than you're actually going to be able to live out. And so let me give you some of our values. The first one is excellence. And the idea of excellence is that we're to bring our very best in everything we do, knowing that bringing our best to God honors God. And all through Scripture, God asked people to bring their very best to what they were doing for Him. Farmers and shepherds in the early days, and so they were to bring their very best lamb if they were a shepherd. Bring your best lamb, sacrifice that to God, give that to God. If they were farmers, and they would bring their first crops to God and bring the very best of what they had. And so always asking for their very best. There's actually a story in the book of Micah where the people were to bring their very best lamb to God, and just as a way of saying, God, we trust you, we love you, we want to honor you. And so that lamb would be sacrificed to God. And so after a while, the people started thinking, we're going to take a lamb, we're going to give it to God, we're going to give him our very best lamb. What if, and it was like this is a brilliant idea. What if, instead of giving God our best lamb, let's give him our sickly lamb, because it's just going to be sacrificed anyway. And so let's give God our most sickly lamb, and he wins because he still gets a lamb. We win because we get to keep the very best. And as you read the book of Micah, God's response is, you know what, don't bother. If you're not going to give me your very best, then don't even bother bringing anything to me. God wants our very, very best. Now, oftentimes, having been in church for a long, long time, I know that oftentimes we don't bring our very best. An example is in our church in Dallas, we had missionaries all around the world. And these missionaries would go off and they would live in whatever culture they were in for 4 or 5 years. And then they'd come back to Dallas to be there for a year or so when they were on furlough. So we had a big room in our church called the missionary room. And the idea in that missionary room is that people were to come and the missionaries were to come and we were to give people in the church, we were to give clothes to that missionary room so that missionaries wouldn't have to go out and buy new clothes. They could just get things free from the missionary room and fit back in with our culture. And it's a great idea, but what actually happened is we would never take our good clothes and put in that missionary room. We'd give all the ratty stuff that wasn't good, and we'd put that in the missionary room and leave that for the people that were there. And God says, I don't want your ratty missionary clothes. I want your very best, and yet we weren't doing that. Paul Harvey, if you remember the name Paul Harvey, and I won't ask you to show of hands if you know Paul Harvey because this will date you very rapidly, but Paul Harvey actually would have done great in this society with podcasts and social media and all, but Paul Harvey would tell stories. And always fascinating stories. And so one particular time, Paul Harvey was telling this story about a lady that was cleaning out her deep freeze. She had a deep freeze in her garage, and she was trying to clean this out. And as she's cleaning out her deep freezer, she finds this turkey, a frozen turkey in the bottom of her deep freeze. And as she's trying to clean out her deep freeze, she wanted to know, is this turkey still edible or not? So she was actually able to call the company that had processed and she'd bought the turkey from. As they were talking, they said, how long do you think you've had it? And they determined together that it had probably been there for about 20 years in their deep freeze. And so they're trying to figure out, is this edible or not? They said, well, do you know if it's ever been defrosted or not? And her response was, I don't know. The electricity could have gone off. I'm not sure. So their response back to her was, well, if it's never been defrosted, we think it's fine for you to eat it. If it's been defrosted, we would recommend you not eat it. And so they were the ones that told Paul Harvey this story. And so her response back to them was, you know what? I don't know if it's ever been defrosted or not. So what I think I'll do is I'll just give it to my church. And sometimes that's the mentality. Not sure if it's good enough for me, but sure, it's going to be good enough for the church. And sometimes when we serve in churches, it can almost be that same kind of thing, where it's just church, it doesn't matter. And I think God says, I don't want your frozen turkeys. I don't want your sickly lambs. I don't want your ratty missionary clothes. I want your very best. And so one of the values for us around the summit, and one of the things that I would challenge you as you host the summit in whatever environment you're in, is that you give it your very best. And excellence looks different at different stages. Excellence when we were 150 and 200 people looked one way. Looks very different now with 22 or 25,000 people. It looks very different, but it was always giving our very best to God. And we go back now and we watch things that we did 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago that we thought was amazing at the time. And now we go, oh my goodness, that was terrible. But we were giving our very best to God in that particular environment. Second value for us around the GLN is authenticity. And we just seek to be real open and honest. Say, here's how we are. And here's how we're doing, who we are. And we encourage other people to do the same. It's not playing games. It's not having facades. It's not just pretending to be perfect, because none of us are. And what's fascinating to me is every time you read about new generations, and as church leaders, and oftentimes people will say, well, this is what the new next generation is really interested in. And every time, and I've been around long enough that I've seen 2 or 3, maybe 4 generations, and what that generation wants. And every time what they want more than anything is authenticity. And what's always said is, oh, this generation is different. They want authenticity. And what's funny is everybody wants authenticity. Nobody wants to be sold something that's not true. Nobody wants to be sold something that you can tell is fake. And so authenticity is important for us. So important that with the GLN, when I stepped into this role 18 months ago, we were struggling. The reason why I'm here is because we were struggling as an organization. And yet we hadn't told anybody we were struggling. And we were putting on a good game and a good face trying to say, man, we're doing fine. But we were losing credibility with people that knew or were around us close enough to know that we're not doing as well as we pretend we're doing. And so we just said, look, we've got to be honest. We've got to say, we've been losing money financially. We've drifted as an organization. We've got to come back in line and make sure that we're really focused on the right things. And it was amazing to watch how, when we were just open and honest, then people that were contributors to the GLN started contributing again, and people said, we're in this. We want to follow. We want to be with you. And sometimes we want to hide. but hiding doesn't work. Authenticity is going to win every time. And so excellence, authenticity. The third one is collaboration. And collaboration is just the idea that we set aside our own personal preferences. And really for us as an organization, say the people we put first are the people that don't know Jesus yet. The GLN exists to raise people's leadership lids, but ultimately we want to raise people's leadership lids or raise the leadership in your church or your organization so that ultimately more people can be introduced to Jesus. And so we want to make sure that we're always doing that. And so it's not about me. At LCBC, we would talk about the fact that it's always for others. And we would tell people as soon as they came into the church, hey, you're here now, and if you know Jesus, that's great, but it's not for you anymore. It's for others that haven't yet come in to our church or our organization. And so it requires a willingness to commit time, money, relational energy, put aside personal preferences just to accomplish the things that God wants to accomplish through our organization. So excellence, authenticity, collaboration, and the last one for us at the GLN we're talking about is humility. And humility just means being flexible. It means being responsible for the things that we're responsible for. It means respectful of other people. We're talking about now at the GLN, and something we talked about at LCBC for probably 30-some years. We would use the phrase, don't do anything stupid. Let's not do anything stupid to mess up what God is doing. And we felt like God was doing exciting things at our church, and if we're humble enough, we won't do anything stupid to mess it up. It's not about me. It's about people that don't yet know Jesus. And so we constantly would say, and this wasn't one of those phrases that was put up on the walls around the church or things like that. You wouldn't find it on our flyers or our written material. But as a staff, we would say, let's not do anything stupid. And stupid typically is relational things where I do something to upset you, you do something to upset me, and rather than talk about it, we talk about it to other people. One of the most damaging things that can happen in any organization is just gossiping or talking behind each other's back. And we would say, let's not do that. Let's not damage the church. Let's not damage the GLN by talking behind each other's back about things that we don't like about each other. And we just say, let's talk to each other and let's just be honest, but let's not play that game. Doing something stupid is a moral thing, where you just cross the line morally, and you're in a relationship you ought not be in. And we say, don't do anything stupid to mess up what God is doing. So for the GLN, our values, again, are excellence, authenticity, collaboration, and humility. And so when you figure out what business you're in, what it is that you're about as an organization, and it's got to be very clear. It can't be a long, dramatic statement. It's got to be something you can say real quickly in just a sentence or so. And so it's once you figure out the business you're in, then you begin to figure out your values. And then we had to figure out how do we behave as leaders.
So David just shared our core values at the GLN, and it's becoming really great common language for us on staff. I wonder about you and your organization. If you were to go ask your teammates what your organization's core values are, would everybody have the same ones? Great question. And if not, why don't you get with your team, get with your leaders, and start naming exactly what you're going to value as an organization? Up next, David is going to talk about actually the behaviors that he wants to see on staff at the GLN.
And again, culture is what you allow or what you don't allow and what you celebrate. And so you've got to talk about how do we respond? How do we act as a staff? How do we act as leaders in our organization? And so let me give you the ones that we're focusing on around the GLN, and a lot of these are ones that we focused on at LCBC. But we start out with our leadership behaviors, and again, you set culture by saying, look, this is how we do things. And if people aren't doing these things, then you've got to call it out and say, actually, that's not the way we operate here. We've got to change. So the first one we talk about is pray about everything. Pray about everything. And so just be talking to God. And don't be telling God what he needs to be doing, but listening to God as well. And so talk to God, pray about everything. So one of the things that we do is we try to start each meeting with a word of prayer, end each meeting with a word of prayer. And it's not that we don't have prayer meetings for all staff every morning of the week or things like that. But we said, just let's make this a normal part of our routine. We don't have to call it out as something separate, but let's just make sure that we're talking to God. Second thing we talk about is live a spiritually yielded life. Live a spiritually yielded life. And all that means is if God says, and it's very evident in God's word or someplace that God says, this is the way you ought to be going, it may not be the way I want to go, may not be the practice that I would like to practice, but God says, look, this is the way you need to go, and so you yield. Yielding just means I'm going to I'm going to give in. I'm going to go the way God tells me to go. Third thing for us is we say work with a spirit of intensity. Work with a spirit of intensity. And this is an interesting one. I go back to my college days on this one. So I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I would always take books home for holidays. So Lubbock, I went to Texas Tech University. It's about 350 miles from Dallas. And so every time I'd go home for Thanksgiving or for spring break, then I'd put books in the car to take back with me to Dallas as though somehow I thought I was going to study over the Thanksgiving break. Never, ever did. Never cracked one of those books. But in my mind, I thought I need to be studying. And I never did. And work with a spirit of intensity means don't even bother taking them home. Admit that you're just going to enjoy the spring break or the Thanksgiving break. But when you work hard, get it done, and then move on. And what I watch a lot of times is people spend more time fretting about what they need to be doing than actually doing what they need to be doing. And so I'd say, do it and then move on, or don't worry about it until you start doing it. Don't let yourself get bothered, but work with a spirit of intensity. And when you do work, you work hard and you go full force, but then you move on. Number 4, allocate resources strategically, meaning there's only so much to go around as far as finances or different resources. And so be very strategic in the way you use your resources. Make sure you're doing those to complete or to accomplish the business that you're in. And so that's part of what we had to do at the GLN is to say, okay, we have very few resources right now financially. So what are the basic things we need to do to accomplish what we need to be accomplishing? And then I just had to set culture and say, no, that's not what we're here to do, so we're not going to do that anymore. And so some of that, those are intense conversations, but it's setting culture, and it's just saying, okay, we don't allow this. We don't spend money on things that are not best for us as an organization, and every organization has to figure that out. Number 5, this one sounds more intimidating than it really is, but it's intercept entropy at its earliest stages. Intercept entropy at its earliest stages. Entropy is the idea of something losing energy, it's dying out, it's not working anymore, and so we just say figure that out at the earliest point and then stop doing it. And again, I've been in church long enough to know that oftentimes we keep doing things that haven't worked for years. And we'll say, I think this is the year it's going to come back. It's going to do good this year. And I just say, if it didn't work well last year, probably not going to work well this year. Let's just go ahead and kill it and move on. And churches and church-related organizations, I think, are notorious for not killing what's not working well. Number 6, build relationships. And so the way we talk about it is we just want to enjoy what we're doing. Whether it's at LCBC, whether it's here at the GLN, I want to enjoy what I'm doing. I want to enjoy doing it with people that I enjoy doing it with. I want us to have fun. Doesn't mean we all have to be best friends. Doesn't mean we have to hang out after work all the time together. But we need to enjoy each other. The way we would talk about it at LCBC, we started talking about here is kind of the parking lot test. And by parking lot test, I just mean when you pull into the parking lot at your church or your place, wherever you office, and you see a certain car there and you know it belongs to somebody on the staff, do you get excited to see that car there, or do you go, oh no, he's here. Oh no, she's here today. And that means you're probably not enjoying them. And so figure out what you need to do to be able to not only tolerate each other, but enjoy each other. Because you're going to spend a lot of time working together, and you've got to be a team, and so build relationships with others, also with God. Number 7, be authentic. Again, just be real. And it's okay to admit that you don't know everything. It's okay to say, man, I don't know. And just be real and authentic about it. It's okay to say I've messed up. And you talk about that and be honest. Again, people can smell that a mile away. And I would say there's nothing that turns people off that are far from God more than anything than inauthenticity. The Bible calls it hypocrisy. It's just putting on a facade that it's not you. And that's really offensive to people that, especially that don't know Jesus. I'd say it's offensive to all of us, but people that don't know Jesus especially. Number 8, recognize that life change is a process. Meaning I can't expect you to be at the same place I am spiritually because I don't know when you started your journey. Your journey may have been slower than mine. And so it's not up to me to judge where you are in the process. But where you are today, I hope it's not where you are tomorrow or 5 months from now or a year from now. We're all on this journey, and it's a process. And again, oftentimes in churches, we'll come in and we'll expect somebody to behave like somebody that's been a follower of Jesus for a long, long time. And we'll get upset when they do things that we know are not right according to Scripture, and we'll want to judge them. And yet the reality is they've come into your church to find out about how to follow Jesus and find out what it means to be a disciple and a follower of Jesus. And so rather than judging them, then just help them continue that process and realize that all of us are in a process. And you haven't arrived either. There's somebody ahead of you. And so realize that life change is a process, and that's totally okay. At number 9, possess a winning attitude. And again, culture is what you celebrate, and it's what you allow or what you don't allow. And if you allow people with negative attitudes to be in your organization, then culturally you're saying it's okay to be sour. Culturally, it's okay to be a grump. And what's fascinating to me is there are groups of church people, groups of Christians, that somehow they feel like, I assume in Scripture, that Scripture tells us we ought to be grumpy, we ought to be sour, we ought to be miserable people. And I don't see anything in Scripture that says be grumpy or be sour. And so for us as a church, oftentimes would say, you know what, you're turning more people away from Jesus and you're actually bringing to Jesus. And so we need to change the attitude. And you need to make sure that you've got a positive attitude, which actually leads us to our 10th behavior. And that's just communicate truth with grace. Communicating truth with grace. And all that means is that, let's take the sour personality. So Kristen's in the back. Kristen is nothing of a sour personality, but I'm going to pick on her for a moment. So let's say Kristen is on our team, and she's been moping and grumping, and she's just sour, and she's turning people off. What typically happens in most organizations, and churches especially, is rather than me go to Kristen and say, Kristen, what's going on? Why are you behaving this way? Typically, what we mostly do is I'd come to all of you, and I'd say, can you believe Kristen? And what a jerk she's being, and I'd tell all of you, but I'd never talk to Kristen. And we just say, you know what? Don't play that game. Nothing destroys an organization faster than talking behind each other's back. And so communicating truth with grace. And so I sit down and I talk, and I'm graceful to Kristen, and I'm truthful with her, but I don't play games behind her back. So much so that we tell people here at the GLN, we tell people even as they entered the church at LCBC, is if you're the kind of person that you tend to talk behind each other's back, we don't want you here. We don't need you here. There's nothing that destroys a church or organization faster than talking behind each other's backs. And we would say that. We had a newcomers class, and we called it First Timers Now, and our first steps, and we still say that today. And we say, you know what? And so what I would always say, and Ruth, my wife, would always say, you can't say that, but I'd say, go ruin somebody else's church, but don't ruin ours. Because we do not want you here, we do not need you here. So those are behaviors that we ask our leaders to follow. So again, you figure out what business are you in, what do you value, you get more specific, what are the behaviors that we need to follow. And again, what you're doing is you're setting a culture, and a culture of excellence, and this is the way we behave. This is what's acceptable, this is what's not. Let me give you a couple lessons learned here, just over years of doing this. Number 1 is stay focused. It's easy to get sidetracked from what business you're in. And usually getting sidetracked means you're settling for what's good as opposed to what's best. And so constantly we would talk about what is good for us as a church and what's best for us as a church. Or even at the GLN, we're talking about, is this good or is this best? And when you start doing things that are good, all of a sudden you take your eyes off of what is best, and you're not doing the business that you were designed to be in. You're doing the wrong thing. And so examples of that around at least LCBC, one, we didn't get involved with politics. And we just said, you know what, that's not something we want to dabble in. Years ago, there was in our little town, so our little town is about 5,000 people, 4,000 people. It's called Manheim, Pennsylvania. And so they wanted to start a petition. They wanted to start a law saying no alcohol could be sold in Manheim. And so they thought surely church people are going to be behind no alcohol being sold in Manheim. And so they came to LCBC, and at that time we were several thousand people. And they said, you're the biggest churches in town. If you will do this petition drive for us, then it'll get it on the ballot to have alcohol not sold in Manheim. And so as we looked at that, we said, it might be a good thing, but it's not the best thing for us. The best thing for us would be not to alienate everybody that drinks alcohol, because it may be the very people we want to introduce to Jesus. And so it's a good thing, but it's not best for us. And so we said, no, we're not going to sign your petitions or ask our people to sign your petitions. And so they all got upset with us and felt like, oh, LCBC is this outcast church that won't cooperate and won't follow whatever they wanted us to follow. We said, it's nothing of that. What's best for us is to introduce people to Jesus. We're not going to alienate people because of that. So you've got to figure out what's best for you. And sometimes you'll have subjective decisions you're trying to make as an organization, and if you know what's best, then it makes it easier to say no to what's good. And there are going to be all kinds of people that are going to bring good ideas to you. And they're going to want to sell you on their good ideas, and so we just say, that's a great idea for you. But for us, what's best is not alienating people, and so you go do it, that's fine, but we're not going to get involved in it. Second lesson learned is benchmarking. Benchmarking, which is kind of a fancy term for learning from others, which is a fancy term from stealing ideas from other people. And man, we steal every idea we can at LCBC, and I don't know if we do that yet around the GLN, but benchmarking, so learning from other people. The way I came up with the term benchmarking, I didn't know what benchmarking was, and there was a guy in our church that won an Excellence Award in Washington, D.C., and it was called the Malcolm Baldrige Excellence Award. And so he had won this award. He invited me to go to D.C. where he was going to receive the award, and I just sat in the back of the room and watched and listened to people, and I kept hearing people talk about benchmarking. And so on the car ride back home after he won his award, I said, so what is benchmarking? I keep hearing that term. He said, oh, it's just stealing ideas from other people. It's just looking what other people do, learn from them. And so we decided that's a whole lot better than stealing ideas. Sounds a whole lot better than stealing ideas. So we talk about benchmarking. So stay focused, benchmark, learn from others, which kind of falls into number 3, but don't stop learning. Don't stop learning. And I feel like you guys are doing that by being here these 2 days with us. You're learning from others. So as a church, the first thing we went to, I think 4 months into my time at LCBC, we went to a conference called the Breaking the 200 Barrier. And what does it take for us to grow beyond 200 people? And then we went to the Breaking the 400 Barrier. And then we would constantly look at churches twice our size. And once we hit 400, we said, what would a church of 800 look like? What would a church of 2,000 look like? Even today, we say, what would a church of 50,000 look like? And let's learn from them, and let's do everything we can to learn. And so we read books together, we listen to podcasts together, we visit other churches together, we visit other organizations together, and just learn constantly from them. Fourth lesson learned, people follow big dreams, so dream big. And sometimes we set such a low bar for people in our church that somebody with high capacity comes in and they kind of go, this isn't really for me. They're not really striving to accomplish anything here. And so I would just tell you, people follow big dreams. They're not going to follow a little dream. They want to be a part of something bigger. And so dream big. Number 5, act like the church you hope to be, not like the one you are right now. Act like the church or the organization you hope to be, not like the one you are right now. And so as we would go and visit churches of 800 or 2,000, we would look and we would try to learn and say, what did they do differently than us? And what do we need to do differently to help us get to 2,000 or 4,000 or whatever the number was? And then start acting like it. And again, you still got to be authentic, but we started organizing ourselves in a particular way that we saw other churches that were bigger than us organize themselves, would start to hire positions that we saw that they had that we didn't have, but we needed. And so we started doing everything we could to act like the church we wanted to be, not like the one we were right now. And I hope you're looking at other churches or organizations ahead of you. And we've learned more over the last several years as a church. We went to Chick-fil-A, had opportunity to meet with their executive staff for several days, and we learned a ton about what it meant to have multiple locations, do things with excellence. We went to the Marriott Corporation, spent time with them. We're constantly looking and saying, what can we do to learn from others? Number 6, you can't please everyone. And as church leaders, and a lot of you are church leaders, you want everybody to be happy, and you cannot make everybody be happy. It's impossible. And so what happens is you're trying to keep everybody happy, and so you do a little bit about this person and what they want, a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and before you know it, you're just mush. And you're not accomplishing everything, and everybody's frustrated. And you know what that feels like. And I could walk into any church, and I could tell you pretty quickly, they're trying to keep everybody happy or they're going somewhere in a positive direction. Because they're not happy. So we just decided early on, we can't please everyone, so we're not going to try. And we constantly talk about the 90-10 rule. You've heard of 80-20, but this is 90-10. And what we would say is we want 90% of the people to be wildly enthusiastic about what we're doing, and 10% can be wildly upset with us, and we're okay with that. And so when people come, they tell us they're not happy, we're like, man, I appreciate what you're saying, but this is the direction we're going. And if you feel like you need to go a different direction, then that's okay. lots of other good churches in Lancaster County. You can go somewhere else. And that was shocking to people when we first started saying that. But it just kind of, you're setting the culture, and you're saying, this is what we celebrate, this is what we don't allow, here are the boundaries that you play in. And then it gave us permission not to get all bugged out when there were people that were upset with us. And early days, when there were 200 people, then that meant 20 people were upset with us. Felt like a big number then, but now you look at it and go, that's not that many people. Now we look at it and go, okay, that means 2,000 people are upset with us. But what happens now is we'll do something, we'll try something, and we'll get 30, 40 emails of people that didn't like what we did. And so everybody gets all upset saying, oh, people were not happy with that. And then we'll go, wait a minute. So 90-10, we got 40 emails. Let's see, 10% would be 2,000, 3,000 emails. We're okay. We still have another 1,100, whatever the number is, people that could be upset with us. So it's okay to have. And actually, sometimes we would find ourselves going, we haven't gotten any negative emails in a while. Maybe we're not trying enough. Maybe we're not pushing the envelope enough. And so we need to be working more. So just to realize you cannot please everyone. The last thing that we learned, and I struggle with this one, thinking that maybe it ought to be one of our values, but no matter what you're doing in your organization, keep one eye on eternity. Constantly keep one eye on eternity. And what that means is everybody on staff in the church or everybody on staff at the GLN has a specific task that they're assigned to do. They've got some responsibilities. But really the reason why they're doing that task is to make a difference for eternity, to make a difference and see people come to know Jesus and spend eternity in heaven with Jesus. In a church setting, so around LCBC, we've got people that work out in the parking lot. And you may sign up to work in the parking lot and you think it's a cool thing to do. And during late spring, summer, early fall, it's a great thing to do. This time of year, it's not that great of a thing to do. And you're standing out in the cold and it may be wet and it's sleeting. People aren't doing what you're telling them to do in the parking lot. And we just say, okay, wait a minute. Just remember, your task is to help people get into a parking space so that they can park, but really what you're doing is making a difference for eternity, because when you help that couple or that single mom or whoever it is find a parking space, you're smiling, you're kind to them, you're helping them get into an environment where their lives can be changed for eternity. Maybe they'll hear about Jesus for the very first time. And so what you're doing is really making a difference for eternity. Or let's say you're working in the nursery and you think, I love to hold babies. I just want to hold brand new babies. And so you sign up to work in the nursery and you're loving it for a little while, but then you realize really what you're doing is changing poopy diapers. And it feels like that's all I do is change poopy diapers in the nursery. And so after a while you start thinking, why am I doing this? And we just say, okay, realize what you're doing. Yes, you do need to change poopy diapers. Yes, you do have to go all through the security checks to be able to even be in the nursery. But once you're there and as you're changing diapers, realize what you're doing is making a difference for eternity. Because you're making it possible for a young mom, a young dad to be able to leave their kids in a safe environment so that they can go into their environment and be introduced to Jesus possibly for the very first time. So really what you're doing is making a difference for eternity. So bottom line, a culture and a culture of excellence is you saying, here, these are the things we celebrate, these are the things that we do not allow, and you can't be soft on that. And I realize some of you may not be in the lead position, so it's harder for you to do that, but you can do that with your team, and you can say, our team, this is the way we operate. If it's just for the summit itself, then this is the way we operate when we host the summit. These are our parameters. And you just let people know up front. And when you see somebody that doesn't follow, then you just cry foul and say, wait a minute, okay, we're off here. But you do it with truth, you do it with grace, and you set the boundaries. And before you know it, your team will start operating with a level of excellence, and that's going to infect other teams. And they're going to say, why does your team do things differently than ours? And you talk, and it begins to impact the entire organization. So excited that you're with us and partnering with us around the GLN. Excited for you to lead and lead with excellence and create a culture that's going to lead more and more people to Jesus. So thank you for partnering with us. And let me pray and just ask God to be with you.
Well, there you have it, you guys. You actually got a peek behind the curtain of what's happening at the Global Leadership Network. Again, what David shared inside of this conference is literally exactly what we're going through right now. Those 4 key values of excellence, humility, collaboration, and authenticity. That's the common language that he's sharing with us. And I love that David does that because it gives me common language with my team in our own team meetings to use together. And it just happened the other day where I had to be very authentic and say, I have no idea how to do this one thing that we needed to do inside of a team project. And one of my teammates said, I do, and I can. And so right there, you're seeing the power of, well, one, humility, two, authenticity in collaboration, ultimately to reach an excellent goal. And so again, so grateful for David's common language. And you're probably thinking in your own organization that you might need some of that own common language as well. And so again, go back, listen to this episode, pick out the pieces that work really well for your organization. And hey, listen, our favorite event is actually coming up so soon, August 7th and 8th, Global Leadership Summit. It's going to be here before we know it. And in the same way that I'm seeing the own work inside my own team and the work that you want to happen inside of your team, we don't want you to do leadership alone. That's why we want to give you a special gift. So for any teams over 6 or more people that come to a local public host site, you get $20 off each ticket. Again, that's for 6 people or more at a local public host site. We want to give you the gift of $20 off each ticket. So make sure, go gather up your people, tell them they are going to the Global Leadership Summit, and find your closest local public host site. Thanks so much for joining us inside of this podcast community, you guys. We love having you here. We love knowing how this is transforming your leadership. So if it is, leave David and I a note. We love reading them. Like, rate, and subscribe. And you guys remember that everyone wins when the leader gets better.